They tried to strip him of his identity with a pair of clippers. What they didn't expect was that he held the power to judge them. "Take off your cap." That was the first thing Deputy Calvin Maddox said. Not a greeting, not a sir, not even a glance of acknowledgement, just 4 sharp words, loud enough to bounce off the cold cement walls of the holding cell behind Hall B of the Fulton County Courthouse in Macon, Georgia. Darnell Hughes, 29 years old, stood tall with his wrists cuffed in front. He wore a crisp charcoal gray suit, pressed to perfection. No tie, he didn't need one. And he wasn't wearing a cap. His dreadlocks were pulled back neatly, the way he always wore them when he needed to look sharp. "I said, take off your cap," Maddox repeated, slower now, with a tone that didn't allow room for confusion, the voice of a man unaccustomed to being corrected. "I'm not wearing a cap," Darnell replied calmly, meeting the deputy's eyes. "These are my locks." Maddox squinted, as if the very concept of black hair in its natural state was something alien, or worse, disrespectful. With a long, exaggerated sigh that seemed to carry judgment more than air, he turned toward the metal cabinet near the sink. Darnell's stomach tightened, a feeling he learned to listen to. The cabinet creaked open. Maddox pulled out a set of electric clippers and clicked them on with a sharp buzz. "What are you doing?" Darnell asked. His voice wasn't raised, it was steady, measured. "You're not stepping into a courtroom looking like that," Maddox said flatly. "You're getting cleaned up." "I'm not a defendant," Darnell replied. Maddox didn't seem to hear, or didn't care. He stepped forward. "You've got 2 choices," he said, the clippers humming in his hand. "I do this now, or you stay in here, and we book you for contempt." "Don't push it." Darnell had never been the type to lose his cool. Not in high school, not through law school, not even when his car was vandalized in a neighborhood where he didn't belong, or when he was rejected for a position he was more than qualified for twice. But this wasn't about law or justice. This was about power. A man with a badge deciding what respect looked like, and who deserved to be seen. Darnell didn't move, didn't speak. The buzzing closed in. Maddox didn't wait for consent. He began at the crown, shearing straight through roots that had taken 6 years to grow. He wasn't careful, not a barber, not gentle. He didn't care about the irritation rising on Darnell's scalp, or the rawness left behind. Still, Darnell didn't flinch, didn't blink. Another deputy walked in halfway through. She paused, confused. Then, without a word, handed Maddox a trash bag and left. When the last of the locks fell to the floor, Maddox stepped back, satisfied. "Much better," he muttered. "Now you look like someone we can take seriously." The words lingered in the air like smoke after a match. Maddox nodded toward the mirror above the sink. "You're welcome." Darnell didn't look. He turned his back and said evenly, "Are we done here?" Maddox pointed toward the hallway. "Courtroom 3A. You're up in a few. Don't say I never did anything for you." They walked in silence, the echo of each step swallowed by the long corridor. In Darnell's mind, the buzz of the clippers hadn't stopped. It rang in his ears, a reminder of what had just been taken. But when they reached the double oak doors, Darnell didn't veer toward the defense table. He walked straight past it, to the front, to the bench. Maddox froze. His jaw dropped. The bailiff's eyes widened. And there, in front of everyone, stood Judge Darnell Hughes. His scalp raw and red, his voice calm but unshakable. "I believe today we're here to discuss courtroom conduct," he said, locking eyes with the deputy who had violated him. "Let's begin." The room fell into silence. No applause. No shouting. Just stillness. The kind that follows a tectonic shift. Maddox didn't move. He stood, suspended in place, one hand brushing his duty belt like he needed something to hold on to. But Darnell didn't need a robe or hair to command that courtroom. He had the truth, and the power to name what had just happened. Judge Darnell Hughes adjusted the microphone with practiced ease, his fingers steady as they flipped open the file before him. He already knew this wasn't his usual docket. Still, he examined the paperwork with the same focus he brought to every case. "This hearing is scheduled in the matter of a citation issued to a Mr. Darnell Hughes," he said slowly, his eyes moving across the page. "Failure to signal during a lane change and suspected evasion during a traffic stop." He paused and looked up, directly at Deputy Calvin Maddox. "But Mr. Hughes isn't here today as a defendant," he continued. "I am." Maddox's mouth opened slightly, maybe to object, maybe to explain, but no words came out. Whatever excuse he might have had collapsed in the back of his throat. "I'd like to correct the record before we proceed," Judge Hughes said firmly. "Deputy Maddox, please approach the bench." There was no movement. "I said, approach the bench." Reluctantly, Maddox stepped forward. His gait was stiff, each step dragging like he was being weighed down by something heavier than regulation boots, something like shame. When he reached the bench, Judge Hughes leaned in, voice low but deliberate. "Would you like to explain your conduct in holding room B this morning?" Maddox gave a weak shake of his head. "I thought you were being held. I didn't know you were the judge." Hughes finished for him. "And if I had been a defendant?" Maddox didn't respond. His eyes slid away. "No," Hughes said quietly. "You looked right at me. You decided I didn't deserve to be seen. Not like that. You didn't ask who I was, you assumed. You decided what I should look like before I could speak." The courtroom remained still. No one fidgeted. Even the court reporter's fingers paused above the keys. "I've seen plenty in this room," Hughes went on. "Lies. Regret. Outbursts. But what I saw this morning was different. I saw how power becomes casual when it thinks no one's paying attention." "I was just doing my job," Maddox muttered. "Is that what you call it?" Hughes asked. "If your job includes humiliating a man because of his hair, then either this courtroom has failed, or you're wearing the wrong uniform." Maddox looked cornered, eyes flicking toward the exit. But Judge Hughes wasn't done. He turned slightly, his voice lifting just enough for everyone to hear. "You all saw me walk in today. Head shaved. Skin still raw. Stripped of something personal. And I'm willing to bet most of you assumed I was the one on trial." He scanned the gallery, catching eyes. "That says more than I ever could. We've built a system where dignity is conditional, where humanity is negotiable." Then he turned back to Maddox. "One question, Deputy. Would you have shaved my head if I were white?" Maddox didn't answer. The silence that followed said more than words could. But Judge Hughes wasn't asking for sympathy. He wanted honesty. He inhaled slowly, letting the tension stretch before speaking again. "Let me tell you what those locks meant," he said, turning to the courtroom. "They weren't a fashion statement. They were my father's legacy. He wore his hair like that until the day he died. And when I passed the bar, I promised myself I'd honor him that way. You didn't just cut hair, you cut history. You stripped away memory. But you didn't touch my place in this seat." He paused. "Holding the gavel doesn't always mean holding justice," he added. "That part comes next." Then, with a quiet press of a button, a soft chime sounded through the courtroom. Two plainclothes officers entered from the rear doors. "You are to escort Deputy Maddox to the witness room," Judge Hughes said evenly. "He will be giving a statement regarding this morning's events." Maddox turned, searching for help, from the bailiff, from anyone. No help came. The bailiff offered a slight nod toward the internal affairs officers. Maddox followed, slow and quiet. No cuffs, no protest. Just silence. Once the doors clicked shut, Judge Hughes sat back. He scanned the courtroom. Familiar faces, clerks, attorneys, observers. Not one looked away. "This hearing is concluded for its original purpose," he said, closing the file. "But before you go, I'd like to speak briefly, not as a judge, but as a man." He rose, stepped down from the bench, no robe now. Just a man. A man with a newly shaved head and a voice sharpened by what had just happened. "I've sat through hundreds of cases. Some tragic, some complex. But I've always believed that law, at its best, is rooted in fairness. And I've done my best to uphold that." He looked around again. "But what happened today wasn't just an insult to me. It was a symptom. A reflection of a system where the assumption of guilt walks ahead of identity." He paused. "How many of you would have stopped that man before he turned those clippers on me? How many of you would have spoken up if you thought I was just another face in a cell?" An older woman in the second row wiped away a tear. A young public defender leaned forward, solemn. A reporter lowered their phone, finally listening instead of recording. "The problem isn't just one deputy," Hughes continued. "It's a culture. One that encourages silence, protects the wrong kind of power, and punishes dignity that doesn't come in the right package." Then he returned to the bench, pressed the intercom. "Have the court administrator contact the DA's office," he said. "We're referring a case of misconduct for immediate review." He didn't say Maddox's name again. He didn't have to. The bailiff leaned in quietly. "You okay, Judge?" There was a pause. "No," Hughes replied. "But I will be." He stood and walked toward his chambers. As the doors closed behind him, the quiet turned into murmurs, then conversations, low, urgent, awakening. By midday, the story had hit local news. Deputy shaves judge's head in holding room, mistaken identity cited. The headlines didn't capture the truth. Not even close. But it was enough to stir a reaction. Phones at the courthouse rang nonstop. Activists, residents, reporters, all asking if it was real, how it happened. Some called to support Judge Hughes. Others, anonymously, tried to defend Maddox. Inside his chambers, Judge Hughes sat behind his desk. Lunch untouched, hands folded. The blinds were drawn. A soft knock. His clerk, Justine Brower, stepped in. "You've got 3 media requests." In this, she handed him a paper, a message from Sheriff Delancey. "Says it's a misunderstanding. Wants to meet in private." Hughes exhaled a short laugh through his nose. They love that word, misunderstanding. Always sounds cleaner than the truth. Justine didn't smile. "They're already trying to spin it, Darnell. Say you overreacted." "I didn't react at all," he said. "That's what's bothering them." He looked at the mirror on the far wall. His scalp still raw. A red patch near his temple had scabbed. No apology had come. No official statement. Just controlled messaging and whispers. He picked up his phone and dialed. Not a reporter. Not the sheriff. His mother. "Hey," she answered. "You all right?" He hesitated. "I will be." A pause. Then, gently, "Did he mean to do it?" "Yeah," Hughes said. "He meant it." She didn't cry. Didn't gasp. Just replied with what he already knew she'd say. "Then do what you have to." That evening, the sheriff's office issued a formal release. Deputy Maddox acted under the belief that the individual in custody was awaiting trial. While his methods may not reflect updated departmental procedures, we are reviewing the matter thoroughly. Appropriate action will be taken. No apology. No responsibility. Just polished damage control. Meanwhile, online, the battle lines were already drawn. Some hailed Judge Hughes as a symbol of grace and strength. Others accused him of playing the victim. A few said he should be grateful, that Maddox was simply trying to make him look the part. But the courthouse parking lot told another story, one the headlines couldn't capture, one that wasn't finished yet. By sunrise, the courthouse steps were filled with protesters. Some held signs that read, "Honor our crowns and judges wear locks too." Others chanted with voices that cut through the morning air. But it wasn't just noise anymore, it was momentum. The kind that makes institutions flinch. Inside the courthouse, quiet conversations shifted. What started as murmurs became strategies. Some officials quietly suggested Judge Hughes take a temporary leave, a subtle exit while the situation settled. He refused. The next day, he entered the building head uncovered, chin raised, like nothing had changed. But everything had. Because this fight wasn't about hair. It was about dignity, representation, and being seen in spaces that still struggled to look beyond the surface. And what came next would reveal just how deep the fractures ran, well beyond one courtroom or one man. 3 days after the incident, Judge Hughes received a letter from the state's Judicial Conduct Board. The language was carefully measured, too careful. They were reviewing the circumstances of the situation involving Deputy Maddox and whether Judge Hughes should have recused himself due to a possible conflict of interest presiding over his own mistreatment. It wasn't disciplinary, not officially, but it was a shot across the bow. He stared at the letter, letting the words settle like dust on his desk. "So now they're trying to turn this into a problem with me," he said quietly to Justine, his clerk, who was organizing files nearby. "That's the play," she said without looking up. "Confuse the issue enough, and people forget what it's really about." He leaned back in his chair, tired but firm. "They want me to apologize for not reacting like a victim. Or worse, for daring to wear this robe while looking like someone they'd rather see shackled before it." Justine finally met his eyes. "You going to the town hall tonight?" He nodded slowly, thinking about it. "Then go." That night, the community meeting at Macon Civic Center was standing room only. Over 200 people, black, white, young, old, teachers, retirees, lawyers, mechanics, all gathered under flickering overhead lights. The air buzzed with tension. Judge Hughes wasn't on the speaker list. But that changed when someone in the crowd called out, "Let the judge speak." Another voice echoed the demand. Then another. The moderator looked to Hughes. He stood, adjusted his collar, and stepped up to the microphone. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," he began. "Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I came to listen. But now, I think it's time." He looked around the room. "What happened to me last week? That wasn't new. That's exactly why we need to talk about it. The act was personal, but the mindset behind it? That's old. Learned. Embedded." A few people nodded. One woman near the front whispered, "Say that." "I've been called all sorts of things since then," he continued. "Dignified. Angry. Too calm. Too bold. But let's call it what it was, violence. Not just physical, but symbolic. Because telling someone they don't belong unless they meet your definition of acceptable? That's control disguised as procedure. Applause rose short but charged. He gripped the microphone tighter. I've sat on the bench nearly 5 years. Earned that seat with a degree, 3 bar exams, and a grandmother who didn't let me quit. And I'm not going anywhere. Now the applause lasted longer. Louder. If people think I should have just taken the insult and moved on, they don't understand what justice really looks like. Justice isn't always quiet. It doesn't always wear a tie or speak in measured tones. He handed the mic back. The crowd stood. Outside, a local reporter caught him before he could leave. What do you say to those who think this story's getting too much attention? He paused, then looked straight at the camera. I'd say it's never been about me. It's about how easy it is to let injustice slide until the person they try to silence is the one holding the mic. But Judge Hughes would soon discover, speaking out always comes at a cost. By the following Monday, the courthouse felt different. The usual rhythm, chatter in hallways, quiet jokes by the coffee pot, was replaced with silence. Stiff nods. Avoided eye contact. People didn't know what to say to him, or maybe they did, but lacked the nerve. The judicial board hadn't issued any formal ruling yet. But the rumors swirled. Some said Hughes should recuse himself from any cases involving law enforcement. Others hinted that perhaps he should step aside for the sake of public trust. That phrase, public trust, kept popping up. In emails, editorials, closed-door conversations. But it wasn't about trust. It was about comfort. And Hughes had disrupted the illusion by refusing to vanish. On Tuesday morning, he entered courtroom 3A. 2 new deputies stood in the back. Neither met his eyes. That wasn't new. What was new was the silence from the gallery. Usually, people whispered while waiting for court to begin. Now, they stared, watching, measuring. How would the judge who had been publicly humiliated carry himself? He did what he always did. Took the bench. Called the docket. Began the day. Mid-morning, during a sidebar, a defense attorney leaned in. Off the record, she whispered, "More folks are with you than you know." He didn't smile. Just nodded. "Thank you." Back in chambers, his inbox overflowed. One message caught his eye from the sheriff's office. Not Sheriff Delancey himself, but one of his captains. A request to meet. 2 mint fences. He stared at the email, then clicked delete. Later, a call came in from Judge Charles D. Loesch, retired, respected, a mentor. A white man who once wrote a landmark opinion on racial bias in traffic stops. "You holding up?" Deloche asked. "I'm still showing up," Hughes replied. "That's the hardest part," Deloche said. After a pause, he continued. "They're going to pressure you. Wrap this whole thing in red tape. They may even offer you a graceful way out. Don't take it." "I know," Hughes said, "but it's starting to feel personal." "That's because it is," Deloche answered. "You made the system look in the mirror. That always stings more than people admit." They spoke for 20 minutes. About politics, power, and the price of telling the truth. After the call, Hughes sat by the window. He felt drained, not just physically, but soul-deep tired. Tired of code switching. Tired of swallowing anger to make others comfortable. Tired of being the one expected to hold steady while others acted recklessly. He remembered something his father once said. "They'll forgive you for being smart, but not for being proud." It hadn't made sense at the time. Now it did. But pride wasn't what kept him going. Purpose did. So the next day, when the local bar association asked him to speak on professional resilience, he said yes. No script. No speech. Just himself. Bald. Exhausted. Unapologetic. The conference room was plain. Beige walls. Folding chairs. A scuffed podium. But the energy inside was heavy with expectation. People didn't come just to hear about resilience. They came to see what Hughes would do next. He walked in alone. No guards. No entourage. Just a man in a blazer and open collar, scalp still raw beneath the fluorescent lights. Some greeted him cautiously. Others, mostly black attorneys, came straight up to shake his hand. "You're carrying all of us," one whispered. "Don't let them break you." When it was his turn to speak, Hughes stepped to the mic, paused, then began. "Resilience," he said slowly. "That's the word they use when they don't plan on changing anything." A murmur ran through the room. "I've been told I should have kept quiet." That speaking out made things harder. But here's the truth: silence doesn't protect systems. It preserves them. He looked directly at the law students near the front. "They shaved my head without permission. Not because I broke any law, but because I didn't look like someone they wanted to respect. They thought I was beneath them, but I wasn't." His voice thickened. I was the man they were supposed to answer to. If they'd looked up, silence gripped the room. I'm not here for sympathy, he said. I'm not here for a hashtag. I want change. Real accountability, not just for one deputy, but for every bystander who stayed silent and every leader who tried to spin the truth. He pointed to the attorneys in the room. We are the ones with power. If we don't call out injustice in our own halls, what do we even stand for? Applause broke out sharp, sustained. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I'll keep showing up. And this scar, I'll wear it the way others wear titles. Earned, visible, and never forgotten. After the talk, a young student came up to him. I'm sorry this happened to you, Judge. He shook her hand gently. I'm not. Not anymore. If it hadn't happened, too many would still believe silence is safety. That night, local news aired clips from his speech. One line was played over and over. Resilience isn't staying quiet. It's standing tall when they try to cut you down and still refusing to shrink. By morning, the quote had gone viral. But behind closed doors, new threats were forming. Judge Hughes received word from an old colleague at the Capitol. Lawmakers were drafting a resolution, calling for a formal review of his conduct, framed under the banner of courtroom impartiality. It wasn't justice. It was retaliation. The fight wasn't over. It was escalating. But this time, Hughes wasn't standing alone. A storm was gathering, and more voices were rising.